You'll go a long ways to see prettier drippings than those.
By sterilization. After all, this is not an operation, you know?
Not yet, but I may get hot and operate on everybody in the joint, including you.
It's the Marx Brothers Council Podcast, episode 93, A Day at the Races, Resaddled. Marx Maniacs, welcome to the program. My name in chronological order is Noah Diamond, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, whose name in order of appearance is Matthew Conium. Matthew, tomato soup?
Sorry, I wasn't ready for that at all. Hello.
And behind the scenes, pulling the various levers and cords that operate our heads, is our fearless leader, producer, and the man who taught us the Lindy Hop, Bob Gassell.
Matzo ball soup to you.
Well, our regular listeners will be all too aware that over the course of our first 50 episodes, we offered intermittent deep dives, which we referred to as deep dives, into all of the Marx Brothers films. And that with episode 73 in September of 2024, we inaugurated a series of redives, or redives, returning to every one of the canonical Marx Brothers movies and giving you, our brilliant listeners, the opportunity to comment on the films and giving ourselves the opportunity to comment on your comments. And at this point, we've made it all the way to A Day at the Races, a film that we all agree was released in 1937. The redives have been in chronological order, but our original deep dives were not, and A Day at the Races was in fact the first Marx Brothers film we ever deep dove into, all the way back in episode 3. That was 8 years ago This month. Yeah. So even though we have not concentrated on this film in a long time, although, of course, aspects of it have been discussed on the podcast since then, this is a real return to our own podcasting roots to be addressing this particular entry in the series. And as always with the redives, we've got an all-star lineup of commenters waiting in the wings. So I think we'll get right to it. Are you ready to buckle down?
I'm ready.
All right, then we're going to start with comments from listener George Agnos. And I'll just say, on some of these pronunciations, I am taking a guess, as always. Some commenters pronounce their names for us in their comments. In some cases, we're familiar with their pronunciation. This name is a new one for me, saying it out loud. So, George, I am agnostic. Don't turn us off. There's a lot more to come, folks. Stay with us. I apologize for that one. On the pronunciation of your name, here's what George has to say about A Day at the Races.
I know fans that consider this their favorite and others that rank it very low. So, is A Day at the Races the last of the great Marx Brothers films or the first of their weaker films? My answer is yes. I consider it great because it does what a comedy should do. It makes me laugh. I find all the comedy routines in this film very funny. I like Chico's character here. I see him as a reformed con man who wants to do good but will revert to his old ways to help his new friends. The Tootsie-Frootsie scene is the most obvious example of this, but we also see it in other scenes in the film, often aided by Harpo, the other reformed con man in this film. I find Margaret Dumont delightful as a hypochondriac, and with Groucho as the horse doctor taking advantage of her, I think it's a nice setup. But as much as I like this film, I think it does have two flaws. The first was the decision to stack the musical numbers into two long sequences. This approach takes too much time away from the comedy, and I can't help thinking, when is the comedy coming back? The second is the sequences on the day of the race itself. Now, if this were a light comedy where the viewer is heavily invested in the storyline, the scenes actually work beautifully. However, this is a Marx Brothers film, and I would have liked to have seen the Marx Brothers put more of their stamp on this. As well done as the scenes are, we don't get enough of their brand of humor. So there you have it. I consider A Day at the Races a very enjoyable film, but it could have been even better.
And I concur.
I also concur. I think the idea that the Marx Brothers characters in this film are reformed con men is an interesting one. It's almost a meta-theatrical observation. Like, the Marx Brothers have always seemed like con artists of one kind or another. And here it starts in A Night at the Opera, of course, but we really feel it here. Yeah, in a way, they do seem reformed. I mean, in a way, they are reformed comedians, reformed entertainers, not doing the same kind of damage they used to. And it's kind of charming to think of the characters and the performers as that this is their attempt to stay on the straight and narrow and be good and well-behaved, traveling first class at MGM.
And it is almost painfully neat, isn't it, that the film that is simultaneously their last good one and their first bad one is also exactly in the middle of that run of 13. I think one of the other people that we will come to later on describes it as the hinge on which their career, but film career at least, hangs. It is almost supernaturally neat. The only other example I can think of from my own body of opinion is that what is for me the golden period of Abbott and Costello's career is the 6 films between Buck Privates and Buck Privates Come Home. So that has the same kind of symmetry. But it is almost too perfect, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's hear what Arnie Bernstein has to say.
A Day at the Races is one of the best of the Marx Brothers movies. If you followed my advice, you'll see it's on par with any of the Paramounts. I edit it via fast forward. Overall, I skip most of Chico's Miss Judy scenes, which drain Chico of his natural rapscallion qualities. Reduce all the Judy and Gil scenes to a bare minimum, if not eliminate them altogether. They're boring. Cut the water carnival sequences, including the Chico and Harpo numbers. Okay, keep the Chico and Harpo numbers. You can tell Chico is having a great time. The piano flying to pieces once Harpo starts playing is anarchy worthy of the Paramount films. Definitely cut out the Who Dat Man sequence. Not only is the production distracting from the Marxes, it hasn't aged well. It would work as a soundie from the period, interesting on its own as a cultural touchstone, and showing some wonderful energy by African-American singers and dancers who deserve a number worthy of recording on its own. Also, it would eliminate the painful moment when Groucho, Chico, and Harpo don blackface to escape the sheriff. See Groucho's denunciation of blackface humor in the William F. Buckley TV interview, which came about 30 years later. What's left is about an hour or so of great stuff. Like Animal Crackers, you can see which bits were honed on stage, particularly the Tootsie-Frootsie scene. The pacing leaves open just a few seconds after each exchange or punchline, where the audience is laughing. The examining scenes also show advantages of a roadshow testing of material. Camera work and editing are at a minimum, getting out of the way so the Marxists can do what they do best. Another factor I love in Races is the inversion of Chico, the fool, to Groucho's con man in Coconuts and Animal Crackers, particularly the Tootsie-Frootsie scene. Chico is in control of the situation. Groucho's jokes and punchlines are wonderful, but Chico is leading. It's a nice take on the rapport they shared in the Paramounts, but with a smarter Chico this time out.
It's interesting. I'd forgotten that Groucho ever gave any opinion about blackface comedy.
Oh, yes.
I'm not terribly familiar with that Buckley interview, so that had passed me by. I seem to remember him saying in a much older interview that he was a fan of Moran and Mac, unless I dreamt.
Yeah. That rings a bell. And yes, his interview on Firing Line with William F. Buckley, I think that was in 1967 or 68, is interesting. It's one of his more interesting interviews, actually, because it's one of his more serious interviews. And yeah, he says that Groucho says that although he personally has enjoyed minstrelsy over the years because he's a product of the era when it was the most popular form of entertainment in the United States, he thinks now, speaking in the late 1960s, that now it's wrong and shouldn't be done. And he says something to the effect of disparaging people in public is something he's opposed to. And it's kind of great irony to have that remark on the record from Groucho Marx, who some people, mistakenly in my view, see as an insult comic. But yeah, that Buckley interview is interesting. And indeed, Groucho says that he thinks blackface is a practice that should be abandoned. And he's saying that, in the late 1960s. I suppose, should we say, give a capsule version of our feelings about the All God's Chillin' number, just because it's come up for the first time here, but I suspect not for the last.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, as you say, it is territory we've covered a lot. My feeling is that its heart is in the right place, and that the only fair way, I think, to judge any art of the past in that sort of a respect is not by comparing it to our own standards, but by comparing it to the standards of the time. And then you can say, is it simply something that is blindly reflecting those standards, or is the arrow pointing backwards? Is it a bit regressive, or is the arrow pointing forwards? Is it a little bit progressive? And I think to a very small degree, that is the arrow pointing forwards.
Yeah, I generally agree with that, and I think people often are to attack this sequence too enthusiastically or defend it too enthusiastically, and that, as is so often the case, the truth is somewhere in the middle. The idea that there was any malicious intention behind the scene, it seems to me, so clearly not the case. And as many have pointed out, there are ways in which the sequence can be characterized as being forward-thinking, racially progressive. And certainly I've never heard anyone suggest that it is anything but musically excellent. And, that is never denied. But by the same token, I think some people are a little too defensive of it too, to say like, oh, it's not racist. There's nothing racist about it. And if you think it's offensive, then you're too sensitive and you're trying to falsely apply modern standards to products of the past. Well, that lets it off the hook a little too much, because even though I don't think the people who created the sequence had any malicious intent, come on, we can all see that it is a product of a racist studio era that, very regularly filled Hollywood films with either regressively stereotypical black characters or glorifications of the Old South that continue to be something of an impediment to racial progress in the United States. So, as is so often the case, it's a question of intent. I certainly wouldn't support the sequence being censored. I also really don't like it when people make these points about the undeniable racism that produced sequences like this, and those people are sort of shouted down or waved out of the room as being unreasonable or somehow missing the point. No, I think those people are also correct.
Well, whatever you think of it, you have to admit that it does make modern screenings and broadcasts somewhat awkward, as it does have to be acknowledged and dealt with.
It sure does, yeah. And there is something too about the button of the Marx Brothers appearing in this kind of quasi blackface, axle grease gag that's built into the story, but it takes a little bit of the air out of the things we might say in defense of the sequence. And in a way, it would be better if the Marxes didn't appear at all in that part of the film.
So again, I think that in itself is, they're kind of a victim of their own high standards there, because we simply, don't expect that sort of thing from them. I think we would be far less shocked if something like that came up in a Harold Lloyd film, which it does, or a Three Stooges film or whatever, I think because we associate them with higher standards in that respect, quite rightly.
Yeah.
That's why those few incidents do tend to stand out more, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. But that's a point about blackface, as well as a point about the Marx Brothers. It's often surprising who did it. When we're exploring this, one of the things we run into so quickly is like, oh God, Judy Garland, Fred Astaire, Mickey Rooney, all of our heroes of that era in Hollywood participated in blackface. And as this sequence shows, even the Marx Brothers sort of went there.
On a more contentious note,
how dare you?
I'm actually not too keen on that piano exploding. I think it's a bit silly.
Me too.
I wouldn't mind if he took an axe to it or something, but for it to just do that of its own free will,
yeah,
I'm not so keen.
I agree. It's like an old silent comedy gag where a car won't stop jumping up and down or something like that. Yeah, it's a bit contrived for me also. It's also, I mean, there's a lot of good Marx Brothers stuff you could say this about, but it feels so expressly a movie trick rather than a product of their talent and ingenuity.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's move on to comments from Steve McGrath.
Hello, I'm Steve McGrath from Sydney, Australia. First of all, may I say something that has nothing to do with A Day at the Races? My father actually met Chico in 1948. My father was 18, a mere boy and a Beatles youth. Chico came into the music store where my father worked to borrow a piano for his Sydney concert at the Tivoli Theatre. Dad said that Chico was very friendly. He shook hands with all the staff, including my father. He picked a piano and then he played the beer barrel polka for everyone because he probably thought that anybody who lives in Australia would relate to that song, which everyone does, except me. Chico posed for a picture with my father and all the staff, which I could never find a copy of because they probably used the night rate. Now, luckily, the woman that was yet to become my mother was dating my father at the time, and she did not come into the store to meet Chico. If she hadn't met Chico, who knows? I may have become son of Chico. Now, let's get to the races. Let's talk Judy. Judy. She's not all that sweet and innocent. She may have fooled Tarzan, but not me. When Groucho has a rare attack of Thalberg non-humorous humanity and confesses to Judy that he may not be the doctor she thinks he is, Judy doesn't care, as long as he continues to inspire Mrs. Upjohn to fund her sanitarium. So basically, Judy is using Groucho for his connections and to maintain her career. This woman is a veritable Aaron Fleming in the making. Of course, the difference between her and Aaron is that Judy wants to run a sanitarium, not end up in one. Maybe that's why Groucho has this sudden lull in his comic persona. Maybe Judy has already started slipping the sedatives into him. Now we come to my favourite scene, the water carnival. I find it soothing and dazzling and a pleasant break from the boys' shenanigans. I see it as a sort of aqua tenement symphony. This may be none of my business, but I'm curious if they tried out the water carnival scene with the other scenes they road tested on stage. They could have had Salvador Dali design it, with the water on the soft watches flowing under a little bridge and Mrs. Upjohn meeting the pill on the other side. The barn. Let's go to the barn. Jill and the boys are hiding out in the barn from the sheriff. Now, I may be an Australian, but to me, hiding out means trying not to be seen or heard. So why do Gil and Judy start to sing, for crying out loud? With an orchestra backing. These two are just as bad as the Marx Brothers. Not only that, Stuffy launches a complex musical number and even has to drag all the local coloured folk and their children into the barn with trumpets and saxophones and bass drums and tambourines banging away. And if that's not enough to attract attention, there's an overweight man doing the splits. I can just hear the voice of the despondent ghost of Irving Thalberg echoing through the soundstage at MGM. Look, boys, when Hypo's swinging a pitchfork about, the other characters in the scene should really be keeping their legs together. Which brings us to the fake accident that conniving little Judy stages to stop the sheriff driving Gil off in her ambulance. The sheriff sees Judy lying lifeless beside her upturned car, but instead of rushing to her aid, he rushes to the stretcher in the back of the ambulance. Judy could be gasping her last breath. This guy's frantically trying to unfold the stretcher and assemble it, like Jerry Lewis trying to set up a deck chair. Well, that's all for me. I'm off to sing a few rounds of beer barrel polka. I'm Steve McGrath from Australia, and I could have been the bastard love child of Chico Marx.
Good stuff, Steve. Imagine knowing there existed a photo of your father with Chico and not being able to locate it. I hope you don't give up, Steve. We're still looking for Humoresque in our attics. You should keep looking for that picture of your father and Chico.
Do either of you know Steve?
No, not.
He's a new one.
Not
Yeah,
personally.
I mean, he must make his living with that voice.
Yeah.
He's just. He sounds exactly. There's an Australian film critic called Bill Collins, He sounds just like him. He sounds like a public speaker, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. A winning entry if ever there was one. Next up, Joe Irano.
When I was a kid, I can't remember which first. I think Go West was the first movie I ever saw. And then when I saw A Day at the Races, it was just incredible. It was epically long. When I recorded it on Beta Max tape, I was able to cut out the terrible musical sequences that don't offend me as much as I get older. And just the way it looked, the spectacular sets and framing, and it was just beautiful. It was a lot cleaner than some of the old stuff. But it was just basically a revelation as a child to have these people in so many situations, not only in a medical examination room, but also on a racetrack, and then singing with blackface or whatever. It was putting the Marx Brothers into situations that were so enhancing of the situation itself by having them in it. So in a way, A Day at the Races is getting the Marx Brothers into different forms of contexts.
I would say just on that point about how sort of clean and clear it looks, it certainly does. It's kind of partly why I sometimes bang the drum for non-restoration. I mean, it's often said that one of the reasons why the late 1940s Laurel and Hardy films are not as, one of many reasons, but nonetheless one of the reasons why they're not as beloved is because they just don't look as good anymore. Because at Hal Roach they had very theatrical makeup, whereas at Fox and MGM they don't. So they just look like ordinary aging people. I think similarly here, it's so clean and it's so bright, it almost looks like video, and particularly their skin tones in the California sun. It does detract a little from me from the entertainment.
I feel that way too. Yeah, there's a lot of outdoor stuff in the movie, especially the very first scene where we meet Chico. I don't know if it's a location shot or not, but it feels very much like one when he's this way to the sanitarium, the station wagon at the very beginning. And yeah, Chico, I just rewatching it to prepare for this, I noticed how much Chico looks like a man in the sun in a wig.
Yeah,
in a way that he normally doesn't. I also like the description of A Day at the Races as epically long. Not a selling point in this case. Not something they'll quote in the print ads. Our next comments, here's a familiar name and voice, Tom Hamill.
Just a quick comment on A Day at the Races and how the MGM storylines called for different casting choices compared to the Paramount comedies. I love Maureen O'Sullivan, maybe not quite as much as Groucho did, and how ironic that in later years Maureen said that she had a secret crush on Groucho. But I think she's terrific in this role as Judy Standish. And as much as I like Thelma Todd and Lillian Roth, and maybe even Mary Eaton, I think Maureen O'Sullivan is just the right, believable choice for this role, much like Kitty Carlisle was a great choice for A Night at the Opera. So, although I love them, I couldn't imagine Thelma or Lillian as the leads in either opera or races, although I could definitely see Thelma Todd in the Esther Muir role had she been alive in 1937. So I think those other actresses were great in the Paramount comedies, but I definitely think MGM made the right casting choices for their first two films. So whether or not you prefer the freewheeling anarchy of the Paramount films, as I do, versus the more structured discipline of MGM's story-driven approach, the result is a different kind of leading lady. And given these MGM requirements, I think Maureen O'Sullivan was a great casting choice. Thanks.
Yeah, she certainly could have played Arabella Rittenhouse, couldn't she?
Yeah, I could imagine her in that role. Sure. It's interesting how I think in the MGM films, for the first time, the female ingenues in the Marx Brothers films have careers and some agency. I mean, they are still very much the women in love stories in films of the 1930s, but Rosa in Night at the Opera is a singer and a star, and she's respected and an elite figure, and the character Maureen O'Sullivan plays here, Judy Standish, owns and operates a sanitarium. It's pretty rare that even a male character in a Marx Brothers movie has that much responsibility. I don't know what this says about the MGM approach, if anything, but it is notable. And Maureen O'Sullivan, it works. She's believable as a career woman of the time, at least on film. If it doesn't quite seem like Thelma Todd could play that part, it's because she doesn't seem like someone who would be running a major medical establishment.
And I should also say that it was absolutely lovely getting to meet Tom Hamill in New York. Indeed, the Hamills, husband and wife. Really lovely guy.
Yeah, Tom and Nancy are a lovely guy. Here comes another old friend of the show and former guest, Kathy Beale.
I want to address my candidate for the most problematic scene in this movie, and it's not the dance number that most people talk about. Instead, my beef is with the medical examination of Mrs. Upjohn. It boggles my mind that this is the result of testing the scene on the road before audiences. It boggles my mind that this is the best they could come up with, particularly given the standout nature of several of the other scenes in this film, not just Tootsie-Frootsie, but Hackenbush commandeering the phone. Wordplay is at a minimum. Instead of snappy dialogue, we just have lines shouted increasingly loudly, with Harpo's shrill, insistent whistle a constant audio irritant. And where is the humor in the physical abuse of Mrs. Upjohn, particularly since she keeps asking them to stop? At least in Animal Crackers, when Harpo was socking Mrs. Rittenhouse in the stomach in the bridge game, it was as nonsensical and as much a non sequitur as the rest of the game was. Here, it's just an assault, and it presages shooting the wealthy woman out of a cannon later in At the Circus. This is the closest to slapstick that we've seen yet out of the Marxes. And this is the closest to anything resembling the Three Stooges, with which they are often ridiculously confused. I don't think the Three Stooges are funny, and I don't think this scene is funny. In fact, the last time I looked at it, it was unwatchable to me. I said A Night at the Opera was a piece of fruit just barely past its prime. A Day at the Races is fruit with unmistakable signs of spoilage. I guess the only thing left to say is cozy coza.
It's a great rant, and I don't disagree with anything said in it. Very early on in Kathy's remarks, I felt like I should stand up.
Though, to be fair, I have no doubt that scene got big laughs in the theater and on the road tour when they performed it.
Yeah, I could imagine it getting big laughs. Never from me, though. I've always felt that way, like, oh, God, let's just get through this. And why isn't this funnier? The Marx Brothers giving a medical examination to Margaret Dumont should be a classic scene. I agree with many of the specifics Kathy cites about what makes it not a funny or classic scene, but the incessant penny whistle that has no joke to it is certainly one thing that always stands in the way of me enjoying it.
I think there are some good things in it. I like them washing their hands over and over again. I like the old mill stream.
Yeah, I do like that.
And I like when the horse comes in at the end. I agree that it is slapsticky in a way that seems somewhat beneath them. I feel the same actually about the wallpaper paste bit. But I I don't know. I suppose it's probably not my place to say, but I've never been troubled by the indignities heaped on Mrs. Upjohn because they're such farcical indignities, and I do find it funny the way her legs keep going up and down.
Yeah, those things wouldn't bother me if it were a hilarious scene. I think those are the kind of things you think about when you're not laughing. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, although that scene is perhaps the most egregious example, I think it's generally true of the comedy scenes in this movie for me that they just aren't that funny. When they do succeed, and a couple of them do, it's for reasons that other Marx Brothers comedy, wouldn't go near. I mean, that perhaps we'll get to some of these things as we go on. But yeah, that scene is a symptom of much that is disappointing about this film.
And I think it's probably also an early example of something that we often speculate happening with Go West as a result of the Go West tour is that it's probably there because it went over big on stage, and it probably went over big on stage because it's the sort of thing that you would laugh at on stage. That kind of choreographed mayhem is tricky to pull off on stage, and if they did it properly, which I presume they did, I could imagine it being extremely funny. On film, it's to a penny.
Yeah, it also has that no stakes problem. You can tell that the comedy sketches that were tested on stage were tested without the rest of the show, without the rest of the plot, and they feel very standalone. And there's not usually any storyline stakes in the comedy scenes. If there are, the scene is working against them, as in the dictation scene, the dictograph scene with Groucho and Whitmore, which is, to me, probably the funniest scene in the movie, but very unusual for a Groucho takedown of a heavy. He's never played it that way before. Our next comments are from Rich Dries.
My love for the Marx Brothers' A Day at the Races in part stems because it lies in the center of the Venn diagram of two things that I enjoy in life. The Marx Brothers, of course, and Lindy Hop dancing. Having seen Lindy Hop in a number of old films in my teens and early 20s, when the swing dance revival hit in the late 1990s, early aughts, I jumped into the scene with both feet clad in black and white dance shoes. One of the things about the dance's history I learned early on was that the uncredited Lindy Hop dancers in the All God's Children Got Rhythm musical number in Day at the Races were actually members of the group Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, the premier performance group for big band swing dancing back in the day. Fast forward to 2004, when I had the opportunity to talk, albeit briefly, with one of the members of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers who participated in that number, Norma Miller. It was at a weekend-long event being held in New York City to mark the centennial of Count Basie's birth. The centerpiece of the weekend was a large dance held up at Columbia University with a live big band. Among the guests that evening was a spry, 85 years young Norma Miller. Since she only gave performing in A Day at the Races a passing reference in her 1996 memoir, Swinging at the Savoy, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to ask her more about it. After all, there's not too many times one gets to ask a question of someone who worked on a classic Marx Brothers film. Heading over to where she was seated by the dance floor, I politely introduced myself and asked if she had any particular memories of working with the brothers on A Day at the Races. She smiled and replied, "Harpo loved to watch us rehearse. He was really fascinated by what we were doing. Groucho and Chico, they were always off somewhere playing cards." Not an incredibly unexpected answer, but it certainly felt like the right answer, and the very way she said it, well, it made me smile. And if there is anyone out there who wants to see more of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers on film, may I recommend their appearance in Olsen and Johnson's 1941 comedy Hell's a Poppin'. That performance is considered the single best Lindy Hop routine ever committed to film.
Yeah, there are people who are not remotely interested in the Marx Brothers who revere A Day at the Races because of the sequence that we all find so problematic, because it is apparently one of the best records on film of authentic Lindy Hop dancing. And yes, indeed, the sequence in Hell's a Poppin' is often cited as the other example, which is interesting. These are two comedy films. You could draw a connection between the Marx Brothers and what Olsen and Johnson do. In some ways, Hell's a Poppin' comes up once in a while on this show. And both of these films feature these kind of interpolated archival records of a whole dance culture that is of great interest to its enthusiasts.
I had no idea there was a swing dance revival in the 1990s. I must have been on acid and missed the whole thing.
You were watching Skidoo at the time. Yeah, it's actually still. I mean, in New York, there still is quite a revival culture of people who like to dress up like it's the 20s and have these speakeasy parties. The Jazz Age Lawn Party is a annual, I think it's still happening, an annual event in New York City for enthusiasts of vintage music and dancing and vintage sartorial choices and everything. And yeah, that's a whole world, and it overlaps a little bit with the classic comedy world. So there's a lot of personnel in common there. Everyone's favorite father and daughter team is coming up next. That would be Howard and Juliet Megdal.
For me, and I think Juliet, for you, A Day at the Races is like middle of the pack when it comes to Marx Brothers movies that we've watched.
Yeah.
So the critical mistake, from my view, is the decision to exclude Dr. Hackenbush, the song, from the beginning of this movie. We know that succeeds, whether it's a great opening musical number in Duck Soup, a great opening musical number that gives you a sense of the character, specifically in Horse Feathers, and obviously most famously in Animal Crackers with Hooray for Captain Spaulding. There's this amazing vehicle there for it that would give us a sense of Dr. Hackenbush in a way that we wouldn't even need some extra scenes at the beginning of the movie. It gets people singing and dancing in the cast right away. Instead, that song isn't in there. We know how great the song is. Groucho sang it for the rest of his career. And I really feel like the entire beginning of this movie, and in fact, the entire movie itself, would feel different if only we had included Dr. Hackenbush in that movie. Juliet, what about for you? What musical choice stood out the most for you?
I always love hearing Harpo and Chico play the harp and the piano and like all the films. But I feel like it was very unnecessary for the water carnival scene to be right before that, because it's like music on top of music, and like it just felt very unnecessary because after the water carnival scene, of course, the playing is beautiful, and I just don't understand. It was like unnecessary that we had to wait through that.
Listen, I think the entire water carnival is unnecessary, but yes, music on music, I totally agree with you.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Juliet. When Chico and Harpo's solos happen in the course of a series of comedy scenes, they are wonderful respites from those comedy scenes. But when they happen embedded in this water carnival sequence, they're a little less welcome, just because what we want is to get back to the comedy, and they don't quite bring us back to the comedy, even though there are some laughs in them. Now Dr. Hackenbush is a subject we've kicked around before, but let's kick it around again. What's your take, Matthew, on the song?
I've never been a big fan of it, to be honest. Obviously I would much rather have a comic Groucho song than acres and acres of footage that the Marx Brothers aren't even in. By this point in their career, you take whatever you can get. If you're going to compare it though to the other Groucho songs, as people do. I do think it's not as funny. It's clunkier. It rhymes case with case with case. It's very, very derivative of the other songs. So I don't, I don't miss it as much as most people do, which is not to say that I wouldn't rather have it there. Of course I would.
Okay, I'm busting in. I got some stuff to say here. Hi, Howard. Hey, Juliet. I totally agree that I'd like to have the song in there, but if you look at this from the MGM perspective and their world and the film they were trying to make, it doesn't fit. The whole premise of Groucho's character in this film is that he's hiding the fact that he's a horse doctor, that he's not a good doctor. So he can't come out and just start singing and making fun of the fact that he's unqualified or that he's going to rip people off and that his patients are dying. That's a Paramount world. That's not where we are now.
Yeah.
And we're past the point where the film, universe as a whole is blindly following Groucho or accepts him. They're skeptical of Groucho, and he has to prove himself.
Yeah, totally agree with both of you.
One other thing, which it might be useful to say here, which is something that I'd completely forgotten about until I was preparing for this recording, and I was reading some book called The Annotated Marx Brothers. I don't know who wrote it, but recently in the Facebook group, Bob did a poll to see which bit of missing Marx Brothers footage would you most want to stumble on, and it was humorous. It was the missing bits from Horse Feathers and A Night at the Opera, and it was the Tonight Show interview with all 5 of them. And Bob said, also if you can think of any others, suggest those too. And one that I'd completely forgotten about is an edition of Columbia's Screen Snapshots, which was a series of short films they made. And in one of them from 1942, Alan Jones introduces Groucho, who then performs this song. So technically, although the film is apparently lost, he does sing it on film. He sings it on Screen Snapshots, Series 21, number 8. I don't know if he sings the whole song because they're only these little films are only 10 minutes long, and there are half a dozen other star acts in that one little film. So it may only be an extract. But what makes it such a deliciously tempting prospect is not only because it would be the only example of him performing the song on film, but according to at least 2 contemporary reviews, what he sings is not "I'm Dr. Hackenbush," but "I'm Dr. Quackenbush," the original character name that was changed. I can't imagine 2 reviewers independently knowing that was the original name and sort of accidentally getting it wrong. So what I think there are only 2 possibilities. One is that they're referring to some bit of documentation, perhaps the copyright information on the song, and it was copyrighted as Dr. Quackenbush. That's a possibility, I suppose. The only other possibility is that he actually does sing "I'm Dr. Quackenbush" in this infuriatingly lost short film.
Interesting. Yeah, there is MGM stamped studio sheet music for the original Dr. Quackenbush version. The only difference is that the name is Quackenbush instead of Hackenbush. So it was going forward that way for some time. I think there are a couple of TV appearances where Groucho performs the song. And yeah, I always enjoy the song, although I take your point, Matthew. It is in some ways a lesser imitation of some of the earlier Groucho songs. And I take your point too, Bob. It's sort of like, I do wish I would prefer that the song were in the movie because I think it would be more enjoyable than much of what is in the movie. But it's undeniable, I think, that it's more a good song for the movie we wish A Day at the Races were than for the movie it actually is and the character Groucho plays. I think at MGM, the Groucho character doesn't sing. Now, Groucho, the performer, does occasionally sing in the MGM films. A little bit at the end of Races, you've got Lydia, and you've got Sing While You Sell, and Ride in the Range. But I think these songs are all various degrees of diegetic. In the film itself, the character is singing in the "Hey folks, I'm about to sing a song" way. It's not the character expressing himself. Lydia, I'm going to sing a song about my old flame from the circus. Sing While You Sell is transparently about singing a song. And Ride in the Range too is road music for the trip. So it's just not we're not in that world anymore where Professor Wagstaff delivers his speech in song, or Rufus T. Firefly lays down the laws of his administration in song. This is a different kind of musical, regrettably.
And to be honest, in this film, if Dr. Hackenbush was singing a song about himself, it would be about how great and accomplished he was, not how unqualified he is.
Our next comments come from Roy Maltby.
When Chico writes to Dr. Hackenbush, he spells Hackenbush correctly, even though he keeps saying it Hackenapus. At first, it seemed odd seeing Harpo dressed as a jockey, but then after this, it seemed odd to see him back in his usual costume. Harpo's wig looks less blonde than in some other films. Chico's method of selling books seems similar to what I've heard about the Church of Scientology. If the bad guy, Mr. Morgan, takes over the sanitarium, he will turn it into a casino. That seems like something Chico would want, but instead he's trying to help Miss Judy keep the sanitarium. Groucho says that's a case for Frank Buck, as though we're supposed to recognize his name. I did not recognize his name. According to Wikipedia, Frank Buck made many expeditions to Asia for the purpose of hunting and collecting exotic animals, bringing back over 100,000 live specimens. Between 1932 and 1943, he starred in 7 adventure films based on his exploits. When Chico plays piano, the audio seems not perfectly synchronized. In fact, 1 minute and 23 seconds after the first notes that Chico plays, the sound has 1 bar of very high notes, when Chico's action on screen is to play 1 bar of very low notes. So I think the sound was recorded separately. In the examination scene, the sound is a bit odd, as if the microphone is far from the actors and the camera is far from the actors, making it very obvious that this is a set, not a real room in a building. And there's 1 camera angle showing the full height of the actors, and still the top third of the screen is empty. So this room has an implausibly high ceiling. Well, actually, we can't see any ceiling at all, just very high walls. I think an homage to this scene is a scene near the end of Sleeper by Woody Allen. Woody Allen and Diane Keaton have to pass themselves off as doctors performing a medical procedure while being observed by actual doctors. Sleeper also has homages to a few other films, including one other Marx Brothers film. There is a mirror scene in which Woody Allen is shaving and his image in the mirror does not exactly mirror his actions in the foreground. A Day at the Races has MPAA number 3231.
I must take issue with that last point.
That serial number, yes.
Yeah, it is a very, very high-ceilinged room, and that hadn't struck me before. And now that I think about it, I wonder if it's meant to be one of those rooms where it's ringed by a floor of students observing that you sometimes see in films. That's a possibility. The thing that always amuses me about him wanting to turn the sanitarium into a casino is that if you look at the hoarding at the railway station, there is already a casino in that little town. So surely it'd be easier for him to take over that one rather than try and run a rival one that's only going to get half the business. And the other thing
put
is
the other casino out of business and turn it into a sanitarium.
Yes. And the other thing is that I actually, surprisingly, because I'm British, I was familiar with Frank Buck and didn't need that explained to me by any speculative book that I might imagine, largely because there was a TV series called Bring 'Em Back Alive, which was his kind of catchphrase that was kind of very loosely based on him, but had his name. Frank Buck was the name of the character, and that was on British TV in 1983. So I didn't actually need to look up Frank Buck. I also knew of him not long after that because he takes an acting appearance in the Abbott and Costello film Africa Screams, in which he plays himself and gives an absolutely delightfully wooden performance. He really does seem not just inadequate, but terrified to be there, ironically, for a big game hunter. As a result, there is one line he's got that always makes me laugh a lot because he delivers it in such a bizarre way, and it's such a bizarre line, and he really does do full justice to it, and it's this.
Have you seen a short, fat man and a tall, thin man running through the jungle?
No, I don't want to either.
No idea what he means by that, but he undersells it to perfection.
Okay, waiting in the wings with the next comment. I don't even know if we should call this a comment. Listeners are familiar with the podcast episodes produced every time we do this by listener Glenn Davis. Here is his fine work.
A Day at the Races gives us a taste of both the 6 wonderful films before it and the 6 less wonderful films after it. It has some great comedy scenes, and the brothers are still in top form. Maggie's examination and the Esther Muir hotel room scenes are my personal favorite. But it also features a lot of eye-watering musical numbers, a great softening of the characters, and it suffers from being just too damn long. You can actually watch Horse Feathers and Duck Soup all the way to the point where Harpo and Chico disguise themselves as Groucho in the Teasdale mansion in the same time it takes to get through races. In comedy, a longer running time is not your friend. The very first time I saw the Marx Brothers in a movie theater was the classic double bill of opera and races. Even then, at the tender age of 12, races, which screened second, suffered in comparison, especially the ending. Undoing a grand opera and screwing up a horse race are just not the same. In addition, what the boys do in opera is still very much about their personalities in action, Harpo's exuberant physicality and Groucho's wisecracking. Anybody could direct a bunch of cars onto a racetrack, and the gimmick of the horse reacting to the villain's voice almost cuts the boys' characters out completely. As a device, it's kind of beneath them. But over the years, what's really come to, bug me about the finish is that the happy ending is just too damn happy. It verges on being cloying, something the boys had never been to that point. As the brothers and the young lovers celebrate their win, the performers from the Gabriel sequence burst onto the track, all flush with cash from apparently betting on hi-hat, which was more than Chico was able to do. By the way, they're singing All God's Children Got Money, All God's Children Got Dough, which is almost as sacrilegious as All God's Children Got Guns in Duck Soup, except this isn't satiric. And now they all stride towards camera and reprise the songs from the film. Okay, full disclosure, it took me a fair number of viewings before I even figured out that that's what they were doing. But in my defense, Chico sings this. I could never decipher what the heck he was saying. It was years before I realized it was Blue Venetian Waters from Lord Spare Us, The Water Carnival. Then again, I usually ducked out into the lobby till that thing blew over. Chico also quotes himself. Tootsie-Frootsie ice cream. He's essentially saying, hey, remember this funny scene I did earlier? On top of which he says it to Maureen O'Sullivan, who wasn't even in that scene. It's a weird mix of the wrong kind of fourth wall breaking and self-congratulation. Then Groucho reprises a song that wasn't even in the movie. It got cut. Yes, races could have been even longer.
I got a message from the man on the moon for you. Just you. Emily, I have a little confession to make. I really am a horse doctor, but marry me and I'll never look at any other horse.
That joke would actually work better if it was marry me and I'll never look at another horse rather than any other. Is more double meaning. Oh, never mind. What leaves me feeling dissatisfied at the very end is simply the fact that there is a medley of songs from the film, as though that's what we came for. The brothers are smiling happily, ingratiating themselves, secondary to the wash of a big MGM musical, for which this is a very typical ending. It's a terrible harbinger of what's to come. Oh well, at least Harpo gets the last shot.
Well, Glenn can always be relied upon to say things that I genuinely hadn't thought before, but which I agree with, and there are two there. One is that Chico's reprise of "Get Your Tootsie-Frootsie ice cream" is like saying, "Hey, wasn't I funny back there?" Yes. And for that reason, yeah, it does land a little off. I had also, although it's perfectly clear on the soundtrack, it had never really struck me that they are all singing "All God's Children Got Money," and that is not too delightful either. I do think that Any Other Horse is better, though. I'm sticking with that. And I like the way the songs, the little snippets of songs at the end, are all melded into a single number. I appreciate melded isn't a real word, but I can't quite see what I've written there. Into a single number without harsh junctions between them. I think that's quite good studio work. And as for Glenn's observation that in comedy, a long-running time is not your friend. To that, I can only say that's a true statement.
Yeah, I always appreciate Glenn's contributions to these episodes. In this case, although I do agree with most of the specific points he's making, I like the ending of A Day at the Races. It's one of the few things I really like a lot in the movie. You know, I just think it's kind of joyful and musical, and on that basis, it feels a little closer to the spirit of the Marx Brothers than much of what has preceded it, even though it's not really in the spirit of the Marx Brothers. You have made the point, I believe, Matthew, and it's a good point, that the absence of Dr. Hackenbush from this medley does suggest that it was out of the picture by the time they were devising this ending. Otherwise, surely that's what Groucho would have reprised at the end.
Yes,
anyway,
rather than one of Alan Jones's songs, yeah.
Rather than one of Alan Jones's songs. I mean, this ending would make a little more sense if A Day at the Races were more of a musical, rather than a film that has basically all of its songs crammed into one little portion of the running time. Coming up next. This is, we have tried to have this person on the podcast before, and we were felled by technical problems. We will have him on the show sometime, for sure. You know his name if you are a Marx Brothers fan on the internet. Here is Mikhail Ulin.
Well, I like A Day at the Races. I think it's one of the better films. Maybe a bit too long, though. It's like two different films combined, A Day at the Races and A Day at the Sanitarium. And I wonder why they omitted the song Dr. Hackenbush, but kept that Water Carnival.
I could listen to that guy all day.
Well, he's saving it for the episode when we do have him on someday, folks. Mikhail, I'm sure you all know, is the webmaster of the great website Marxology, and a great researcher and Marx Brothers historian. I agree with his short but sweet comments here. Coming up next is a visual artist who is responsible for postcard number 41. At the time we are recording this, our most recent postcard. So if you are a Patreon subscriber to the Marx Brothers Council podcast at one of the top 4 levels, you have received postcard 41 and enjoyed the work of our next commenter. His name, Jimmy Angelina.
Somehow, A Day at the Races is the Marx Brothers movie that I think I've seen the least. And it's in such a strange spot. It's like right at this hinge point. I love everything before A Day at the Races, and I'm weirdly fascinated by all the movies after A Day at the Races. But somehow A Day at the Races doesn't seem to compel me to watch it as much as I've watched the other ones. And watching it again, I think it's probably due to the fact that it seems, I haven't checked the running times, but it seems like it's the longest Marx Brothers movie. It feels more like a month at the races. But I wonder if it's the musical segments that maybe drag the pacing down a bit. I don't have anything particularly against the musical segments inherently, but they do seem cut into the movie at strange moments, and it seems like the flow of the film gets a bit bogged down. Other than that, I mean, I still do love it, and I do think particularly Groucho is in pretty great form still. But yeah, just for whatever reason, it is the most dead middle Marx Brothers movie for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I think those structural things, the slowness of it, it is the longest. I think that it's the longest by quite a chunk. Probably Animal Crackers is the closest to it for
maybe.
But it certainly is, and it certainly is slow. And I think those kind of structural things, the length of it and the boxing together of the music and so on, are probably the only things that one could say maybe betray the absence of Thalberg. I don't think any of the material would be different or better, or there would be more of it, of Mark's material, had he survived. But I think he probably would have instinctively spotted some of those structural problems and sorted them out.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very astute comment. I think we all feel that A Day at the Races is overlong, but it's worth adding to that impression that it's not so much that a 110-minute comedy is unthinkable. It's that this particular 110-minute comedy has far too much has far too much material in it that is beside the point and not amusing enough. Yeah, that's true. And you know, the musical numbers in a musical needn't be something you feel you have to wait through and get through in order to get to the good part. You know, that's a sure sign you're not dealing with a great musical. Okay, this next commenter, I'm not sure I recognize the name. Eddie D Zen?
Hi, this is Eddie Deason. I wanted to give my opinions and thoughts on the movie A Day at the Races, which is one of my favorite Marx Brothers movies. And by the way, I have some good trivia, but one of the trivias I read in one obscure Beatles book, it is actually one of Paul McCartney's favorite movies. Paul McCartney listed this as one of his favorite movies. Okay, now, the comparisons. I always compare A Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera. The Beatles and the Marx Brothers were the two most famous, the two greatest quartets in the history of show business. Of course, they lost Zeppo, so there were only a threesome of the Marx Brothers, but the point is still holds. The Beatles made two really only theatrical movies. They made A Hard Day's Night, which is a classic, flawless comedy gem, which is just like A Night at the Opera, which is the most beloved and most perfect Marx Brothers movie. And then the next movie is the Marx Brothers' second most popular movie and the Beatles' second film. Both films share a thing. They're both great movies, but they both kind of lag in the middle. They both kind of drag in the middle. The Beatles movie was because they were stoned. The Beatles were smoking marijuana at the time. They were into drugs, and they would say these jokes that weren't that funny, whereas all the jokes in A Hard Day's Night were funny. Everyone was funny. Pretty much everything in A Night at the Opera was perfect and funny. But then it lags in the middle, and the reason the Marx Brothers went bad is because of that stupid water ballet thing, which fits good for an MGM movie. MGM did make the best musicals, and it's kind of a beautiful scene, but it doesn't belong in a Marx Brothers movie. That scene should be gone. But here's another point of this movie that I realized. Morgan, you realize after this movie, if the movie actually went on in real life, you realize Morgan could have made a fortune in the next race, right? Morgan, in other words, the horse goes crazy when Hi-Hat hears Morgan's voice. So Morgan goes to the winner of Hi-Hat the next race, goes, look, let's do a thing here. Let's bet on Hi-Hat the next race, and I'll do the voice. And, you know, they could do it, and they can make a fortune next race. If he went out, then Hi-Hat might not have won the next race. But if they stayed with Morgan and teamed up, they could have won a fortune. All right, here's another weird trivia. Esther Muir. Do you know Esther Muir's previous movie to A Day at the Races? I was just glancing through the the movie International Movie Database. And you know, Esther Muir's previous movie to this movie was actually a movie called, guess what? Hi-Hat. It was called Hi-Hat. So that's kind of a weird story, too. I thought was weird. Okay, I heard this was Chico's favorite movie, and we can, notice, we can understand why. Probably Chico, we can envision, he probably would get his paycheck and go directly to a window and bet on a race right there. He probably lost all his money filming this race. Now, there's a great Marx Brothers story, one of my favorite Chico stories. Chico bet on a horse. Hi-Hat is, of course, scheduled in the script to win. Chico bets on another horse in this movie. And Groucho goes, are you crazy? What are you doing? You're nuts. This horse is going to win. Hi-Hat is supposed to win in the script. And Chico goes, I couldn't help it. The odds were 30-1. And my last point is, my great regret is a very beautiful song is, I got a message from the man in the moon. I kind of wish that had been in there. The little bit that Groucho is saying sounds like such a beautiful song, and it's a shame that wasn't included in the movie. I kind of miss that version, I'm kind of sad that wasn't put in the movie. Anyway, thank you for the Marx Brothers podcast. Okay, bye.
Great remarks from Eddie. I didn't know that Paul McCartney was on the record saying that Day at the Races was one of his favorites. It sounds to me like one of those examples of someone naming the last Marx Brothers movie they saw as a kind of stand-in for name a Marx Brothers movie here, but I don't know that, and maybe Paul McCartney genuinely has special fondness for it.
Well, we can ask him about it when he's our guest next episode.
Ah, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we should bring that up
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah.
And as for the Beatles connections, I mean, I am a fan of the Beatles, a big fan of the Beatles, and I do really like A Hard Day's Night, the film. I think to the extent that it is like a Marx Brothers movie, though, it feels more Paramount-y to me than MGM. A Hard Day's Night feels like an unbridled expression of joy, rough edges, a little more anarchic, running roughshod. Whereas Help maybe is a little more MGM, feels overdone, overproduced, has too slick a polish on it, perhaps. All polish and no spit, as Joe Adamson says about some of the later Marx Brothers films. So there's that. Help I find pretty hard to get through. And in fact, it reminds me more than anything of Skidoo, like a sort of overindulged cast and crew having a lot more fun than the audience. But those comparisons are interesting, and I think they do stand. And I completely agree about Message from the Man on the Moon, which is a really nice song, and I wish it were in the movie just because it's better than some of the songs that are.
I like Magical Mystery Tour, which is the kind of incredible jewel robbery. It is a good point, though, isn't it, that they really could have made a mint by teaming up with with Morgan and how lucky that of all the things that his voice might have done to hi-hat, making it run is the one, rather than sit down in the middle of the
Thanks, as always, to our friend Eddie Deason. Coming up next, Peter Freeman.
I've been having trouble putting into words my thoughts about this film. I was about to share a long-winded response by quoting Mark Twain, who began a letter he wrote to his local newspaper by apologizing for not having enough time to make it shorter. And then I remembered a segment from the old Bud Abbott variety show. Bud's guest was none other than Ogden Nash. Ogden read a review of the film that had so few words and yet still managed to express my thoughts exactly. Now, I don't have an audio from that episode, but guys, if Nick Santamaria can find it, maybe he could share it. Anyway, here's what Ogden Nash said. There are unfunny spaces in Day at the Races that cannot be fixed with a song. From the audience faces, it's clear that the pace is too slow and the film is too long.
I love Ogden Nash, and that's great, and I've never heard that before.
And for those who might be a bit confused, the Bud Abbott variety show is a running bit that our friend Nick Santamaria does on his Abbott and Costello Meet the Podcast. Listening for that. He does some funny stuff.
But the Ogden Nash poem, is that genuine?
It sounds like it, but I don't know. I'll have to source this myself. I haven't. Really interesting. I've always thought, I enjoy Ogden Nash a lot, and I've always thought there was a little bit of a Marxian spirit in some of his work, and that in particular, he has a little bit of Groucho in his style. Our next series of comments are from Baruch Gitlin.
The thing I find most interesting about A Day at the Races is the segue from the Alan Jones number in the barn, Tomorrow is Another Day, to the swing number with Ivy Anderson, which I think is just great jazz. I wish you could take away the minstrelly part, the stereotypical part, and it would leave us with a really great piece of music. And the only intermediary between these two completely opposite styles of music is Harpo being the Pied Piper, which also strikes me as a little bit unnecessary. Anyway, I've come to think of that segue as sort of a metaphor for what's wrong with this movie, which, in my opinion, is that it's the first time they really throw the surrealistic Marx Brothers. And they are surrealistic, even if the writers are trying to write them into the story. I mean, just looking at them, they're surrealistic, and they're thrown into this really realistic world with a very realistic type of actress, Maureen O'Sullivan, much more serious than Kitty Carlisle in A Night at the Opera. And the villains are just so villainy. They're not funny villainy like Gottlieb and Laspari. They're just villainy. This Morgan, he's not even cheesy enough to be funny the way Alky Briggs was funny in Monkey Business. He's just mean and nasty. So to me, it's two different movies. This melodrama about the mean villain taking away the sanitarium, and this screwball comedy with the Marx Brothers and this great jazz. I don't think either of them is a great movie, but I do like the soundtracks. I actually like the Water Carnival number today more than most of the rest of the movie. And when I was a kid, I couldn't understand what it was doing there. The other thing that strikes me is the ending. I actually love the ending. I find it nice that the Marx Brothers march off in triumph. And in a way, it reminds me of the end of Modern Times and the Abbey Road, the Beatles album. Because both the movie and the album, it seems like the endings are self-consciously a swan song, a farewell, at least to those characters, to that incarnation of Chaplin and to the Beatles as a group. Now, there's nothing, obviously, the Marx Brothers weren't being self-conscious with the ending of A Day at the Races. I'm sure they all thought that they were at the height of their career. I don't think anybody thought this was the end of anything. But as a viewer, looking back in retrospect and knowing that this was really the last well-produced and pretty good Marx Brothers movie, and very successful Marx Brothers movie, I can't help but see it that way. And I like it for that reason. I find it, to me, I think of them as going off, marching off in triumph.
By the way, Noah, I think we've used up our quota of Beatles references in one episode. So
well, your mother should know, Bob. I think that barn scene is really interesting to me too. And every time I see the movie, when it gets to that kind of interlude between the two big musical sequences, I always feel like, where are we here? It feels like it doesn't feel like a Marx Brothers movie, nor does it feel like any other part of A Day at the Races. The one detail in that scene that particularly stands out to me is, we're always thinking and talking about the racial implications of the Gabriel scene. But how about the sexual implications when Alan Jones says to Maureen O'Sullivan, a grown woman who owns and operates a sanitarium, "Come on, be happy. You're just a kid. Laugh, smile." It's at the time, I'm sure it played as a perfectly comforting thing to say, but it's pretty noxious today. And my wife and frequent collaborator, Amanda Sisk, she has said that whenever that line comes up in the movie, she always would like for Maureen O'Sullivan to just punch him in the face, just knock him out after that.
There's a good point about the villains here and their scheme. I mean, obviously they have been up against criminals before, going right back to the Coconuts, and then you have the two films with gangsters in them. But particularly compared to opera, where they really aren't villains, they're just assholes. It is a very blandly generic criminal scheme that they're pitted against, and that is an unfortunate taste of the future, I think.
Yeah, Alky Briggs and other earlier Marx Brothers heavies were kind of parodies of movie heavies, whereas the bad guys in this film were supposed to actually dislike them and object to their intentions in the storyline, and we don't quite rise to that occasion, so they come off a little bland. Although I do think Leonard Seeley as Whitmore is a good straight man to Groucho in the Lewis Calhern mold.
Yeah.
Here are remarks from Bill Carlin.
Gil, he has this racehorse, and it doesn't seem to be doing what it's supposed to do, winning races. This gimmick with hearing or seeing Morgan that gets him excited, and then they find out he's a jumper. This is kind of reminiscent of the ending of Dumbo. The crows who find Dumbo on top of the telephone lines or whatever and say, "Hey, I have seen everything, but I never seen an elephant fly." This was the critical sequence that showed that the animal had an ability they didn't know about. The horse being able to jump, entering the steeplechase and Day at the Races, and Dumbo, of course, with his big ears able to fly and becomes a hit of the circus. And then just one more thing with the water ballet and, again, the swing number, showing high-class entertainment, supposedly, the people's entertainment swing. So, of course, we think the ballet's ridiculous being in the Marx Brothers picture, but maybe they were trying to show some kind of contrast in those two numbers, The water ballet, high-class, money people, and then you don't need all that spectacle when you got swing. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
I think it is meant to be contrasting those two styles and to fix them in different points on the social scale. But I don't think it's doing so judgmentally. I don't think that we're expected to think of the high class entertainment as in any way pompous.
Yeah, I agree with that. The idea that it is a deliberate contrast, I think, is a pretty astute observation, and very interesting. Even if its motivation was purely, as I'm sure it was, to give the film itself variety, in terms of its content. It's quite true, and it's interesting now that the Lindy Hop sequence is, at least by some, held up as like a valuable historical record of something important, and the water carnival sequence is, dismissed even by people who like that kind of thing, for the most part. I do think one thing we neglect a little bit, sometimes when we criticize the water carnival sequence, we add a little asterisk that we do like when Chico and Harpo play their instruments, under any circumstances. People may forget sometimes how much Groucho stuff there is in the Water Carnival. His dancing stuff is pretty good, including the dancing itself. It is one of his best showcases as far as comic dancing goes. And he's really funny, the juggling act that he does with Margaret Dumont and Esther Muir. There are some good pockets of comedy and that's in the Water Carnival sequence, and it's Groucho. Our next commenter is Ben Urish.
The seams really show with A Day at the Races. It seems mechanical in some way, sort of a paint-by-numbers set. Some of it's really good, but a lot of it is hampered by this feeling of pieces just being stitched together. The first 2 times I saw it was with a college crowd, full auditoriums, full theater each time. And this was at a time when the Marx Brothers revival was still going strong, maybe barely starting to taper off. The big comedy scenes that you would expect to get big laughs from the reputation of the film, Harpo's examination, Margaret Dumont's examination, the Tootsie-Frootsie scene, the big finale at the racetrack, they got some laughs, but not big laughs and not consistent laughs. The scene that really went over really, really well, howls and screams of laughter, as they say, was the Florida Call with Whitmore. That was Stunola. This has colored my appreciation of the film ever since those original 2 showings, and I just think something's missing from it.
It's a really interesting point how your feelings and opinions about a movie can be heavily informed by the reaction of an audience the first time you saw it, if you first saw it with an audience. That's very interesting because we normally don't think of movie. I think about this in the theater a lot. Sometimes in the theater, you'll see a play, a performance that you think is great, but it's obviously not landing with the audience in the room. And therefore, no matter how much you might appreciate it, it feels like it didn't go well. Films usually don't give me that feeling as much, I guess, because I usually watch films at home alone or with one or a small number of other people. But when you see films in the theater with an audience, they do. The audience's response affects the way the film plays. And as Ben points out here, could affect your opinions about the film going forward. Here are some culinary remarks from Emily Malick.
A Day at the Races is a bag of jelly beans. It has some of my favorite flavors. Many of the comedy scenes are good or great, and I find myself coming back to certain scenes while on YouTube. I also adore a good chunk of the supporting performances. I enjoy Leonard Seeley, who plays Mr. Whitmore. He's a perfect foil for the brothers because of how stuffy and expressive he can be, especially how he slowly gets more irritated as Groucho trolls him in the Florida Medical Board scene. I honestly wish he was in more films with the brothers because he's that great. Also, Margaret Dumont is dynamite. She is commanding in each scene and dials up what she's doing to 11. At the same time, it has some flavors that I don't care for, but I'll still eat it. I find the Tootsie-Frootsie and Harpo examination scenes simply decent because of how lethargic and methodical they can be. I'll still watch them because they're funny, but they're not as hilarious as other scenes. In addition, I have always been bothered by the sexism in this movie. As a kid, when Gil says, Judy doesn't have to depend on me, I remember thinking, depend? Judy's about to lose her family business, and this is how you respond after she pokes holes in your plan to save it? So yes, I can't tell you how happy I was when you acknowledged the sexism during the original deep dive. Moreover, Blue Venetian Waters is the worst musical number in a Marx Brothers movie. Even though the staging is beautiful and it's well shot, it's pretentious, and it could have been in any other MGM musical at that time. On top of that, MGM was trying so hard to push the song even though it's not much of a tune. The music is fitting for an extravagant party like the Water Carnival, but the lyrics get swallowed up. It's mainly good to play while you go to the bathroom before Vivian Faye starts dancing. And of course, when you talk about jelly beans, everyone has an opinion on the black ones. Yes, I'm referring to the All God's Chillin' Got Rhythm sequence, or as the Oscars website calls it, All God's Children Got Rhythm. On one hand, it's a brilliantly staged musical number that's fun, joyful, and fits perfectly in a Marx Brothers flick. It also contains great performers, whether it's Ivy Anderson singing or Whitey's Lindy Hopper's dancing. It's for these reasons that I'm elated that it received an Oscar nomination for Best Dance Direction. On the other hand, it's deeply racist. There's no way of getting around it. The black characters are stereotypes whose purpose is to help white people and to be saved by white people. And the blackface is the cherry on top. There's also some stupid sound effects during the dance bit that have always annoyed me. Despite these issues, this is the scene I come back to most often from this film. All in all, while A Day at the Races is not my favorite Marx Brothers film, it contains some great scenes that I come back to. Even the low points don't prevent me from watching it all the way through. It's a mixed bag, just like jelly beans.
Always lovely to hear from Emily, and that was very, very enjoyable. I will just make one small point though, which is it brings us back to what we were talking about earlier. The Lindy Hopper scene is, you know, it's a crude kind of a scene. I think it's a little bit dangerous to describe it as deeply racist, because because I don't think it is, but also because you run the risk of kind of debasing the currency, and then when something comes along that really is deeply racist, how do you then describe that? If you just describe that as also deeply racist, then you run the risk of making the second thing seem not as appalling as it is, or else you enter into a kind of a linguistic arms race where you have to keep upping the terms in order to keep up with what you're describing. A bit like the word star, actually, in film terms. Originally, a star was something distinct from an actor or an actress. You would have actors and actresses, and then you would have this upper echelon who were stars. But then eventually anyone who's acting in a film becomes a film star. So you have to have a new word for the stars. So you get superstar. And then the same thing happens again and you get megastar. And so you get this kind of arms race of terms. So I think particularly in the last 20 years or so, we've seen, some of the negative effects of doing that. So I always urge kind of sobriety when describing things like that. But the basic point, of course, is absolutely sound, and it's always lovely to hear from Emily.
Yeah, I agree with both of those points. I think a lot of this turns on the very subtle distinction that I made earlier about this scene. Declaring something to be racist or not racist is difficult. It's just like declaring things to be art, or like, is this art or is it not art? Well, we have to agree on what art is before we can say that. And racism is such a difficult thing to define. It's mostly, as with art, it's an I know it when I see it kind of thing. And that can be very difficult on analysis. To say that the sequence is deeply racist feels a little bit wrong because it feels like it's an accusation made against the people who created the sequence. And that doesn't seem right to me. I don't think the sequence was born of anyone's hatred. anyone who responsible for writing, producing, creating it. On the other hand, I think it's very accurate and also important to say that that sequence and other things like it are products of a deeply racist system, a culture that was deeply racist, a time in history when mainstream American culture was deeply racist. And that's a perfectly fair thing to say. So these distinctions are subtle, and that's one of the reasons I feel like it's on all of us to be as forgiving and accommodating as we can of the wide range of opinions that people have about things like this, especially in older entertainment.
Also, on Blue Venetian Waters, I again basically agree with that. Just one thought that struck me. I don't know if you've ever been to Venice, but
no.
Those waters are many things, but they're not blue.
Now, our next commenter is listener Christy Brown.
I haven't watched it in about 6 years. And so when I watched it this time around, I definitely saw a lot more of the flaws. It's definitely a mixed bag of a film. Alan Jones feels a lot more isolated this time around. In opera, he feels a bit more a part of the gang. You know, he sneaks on the boat with Chico and Harpo. He's in the stateroom scene with them. He's up on deck with them, having a good time. He gets arrested with them and thrown in the brig. He has to, sneak off the ship as one of the disguised aviators. He hangs out with them in the hotel room. And so by the time you get to the finale, you really are kind of rooting for him because he's been a part of the gang. But here he feels a lot more isolated. He hangs around the racetrack with Chico and Harpo, maybe for a couple scenes. But for the most part, he kind of more interacts with Judy. Judy and his relationship kind of feel a bit more of the center point for his character. An interesting joke is where Harpo eats a thermometer. I find that joke to be almost kind of strange in a film like this because the MGM Harpo is a bit more quote-unquote normal. In the Paramount films, he's a surreal character who runs around and, can eat buns, drink ink, and, eat flowers and basically do almost anything he wants. Here, he's a lot more grounded. And so to have a joke like that, it kind of feels a bit more out of place. Margaret Dumont in general is really fun in this film. She kind of stretches herself a bit more than she usually does. She plays a lot more hysterical this time around. But I think it's pretty okay. It's not my favorite by a long shot, but it's not the worst. How about that for a ringing endorsement?
It is pretty okay. Not the worst.
I agree that it is a step backwards with Alan Jones, because one of the lovely things about A Night at the Opera is how he becomes one of the gang and how well integrated he is with them. And we often say, to a degree and with a success rate that really far outstrips Zeppo even. And suddenly here he is just the boring romantic hero in the background. So that seems a step backwards and a bit of a shame. Again, I don't think I'd ever been struck by that thought before.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think I'd even go a little farther and say that Alan Jones is not likable in this movie. In A Night at the Opera, he is. He's quite charming. A Day at the Races, he bothers me. I think it has as much to do with the writing as with his performance, but...
And he smokes.
He just seems like he's trying really hard, pushing very hard. Every moment feels very artificial.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up next is Jesse Levy.
Margaret Dumont gets a credit on the title page of the film. I don't remember seeing that before or after. Is that the only time? According to Glenn Mitchell's commentary, the Dr. Hackenbush song was never filmed because Groucho didn't want to do a big production number. Is this true? And he asks, how does Chico know Morgan and Whitmore's plan? Is there a missing scene? In fact, he mentions of quite a few missing scenes. He also mentions that Harpo's first harp was from a junk shop. I thought I heard that it was from his aunt or his grandmother. Which one is correct? Glenn mentions that Harpo got injured falling off a Shetland pony. Aren't they small and pretty low to the ground? What kind of injury did he get? Anybody know? And if all the folks at the end of the movie holding up all that money that they won on Hi-Hat, supposedly, had bet enough to win that much money, the odds would have gone down dramatically, and they would have each won about 60 cents, as Chico says earlier. The cover of the DVD shows Groucho, Chico, and Harpo all in bed with a horse. Shades of Duck Soup. And it also says, this year's Big Laugh, Music, and Girl Show. Must be a girl horse.
I think the story about Groucho being too lazy to have filmed it, I think I'm right in saying, originates with his son Arthur in his book Life with Groucho. I think that's the source for that. I don't remember seeing it anywhere else, and so make of that what you will. Arthur is often a little more colourful than the truth would demand.
And you'd be getting the info from Groucho.
Yeah.
So make of that what you will.
I'll respond to the harp question. It's a frequent misconception that Harpo played the harp that was left behind by his grandmother, Minnie's mother, Fanny Schoenberg. He never played that harp. Fanny was a harpist in her earlier showbiz life in Germany, but by the time the Marx Brothers were born, the harp that Fanny still had in her possession was unplayable. And you can find this in most of the sources on the Marx Brothers' childhood. The harp was an antique thing that didn't have strings on it anymore. It was an object of great fascination for Harpo. It probably is the reason why he felt a connection to the harp, and it probably is also the reason why Minnie decided this might be the right instrument to procure and send to Harpo and encourage him to start playing. But he never played Fanny's harp or learned on it or anything like that. It was more a source of inspiration.
And I'll address the Shetland pony issue. Yes, yes, they are very small. So what a sap that guy Harpo must have been.
Now we have some big remarks from Steve Small.
During Alan Jones's and Vivian Faye's musical number, the male musicians appear to be wearing Hispanic-like dress wear. This might have something to do with the North and South American good neighbor policy going on at the time. A few years later, Walt Disney would fly to South America as part of that deal. The result would be the Three Caballeros. I noticed what looked like an unplanned camera move. When Alan Jones tries to get Groucho to stay, he asks Groucho if he's a man or a mouse. The camera starts to pan, but returns to center screen because they hadn't finished the scene. After Groucho is harassing Whitmore over the phone, the scene cuts to Harpo and Chico. Chico claims that Whitmore is crooked. Was there a cut scene that would explain Chico's knowledge about Whitmore? He shouldn't know that at this point in the film that Whitmore is out to discredit Groucho. After watching A Day at the Races for this purpose, I've changed my feelings about it. I liked it a lot, better than opera. But that might be because I haven't watched races nearly as much as opera.
Better than opera is not something we hear a lot in conversations about A Day at the Races, but a contrary opinion is always more than welcome here.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that when I first saw it, I don't think it struck me as any kind of a significant decline. I'm trying to think if it was, in fact, the first MGM that I saw, and I think it probably was, actually, either that or Circus. I think it was probably the first MGM I saw. So by rights, I should have been kind of harder on it than I am now, but I wasn't for a long time. I think because I basically would look them up in Halliwell's Film Guide, and that was one of the ones that had 4 stars. I kind of went into it expecting it to be great, and I kind of came out of it thinking that too, actually.
Yeah, that's probably roughly my early impression too. I certainly didn't dislike A Day at the Races, my first, second, third, fourth, or fifth time around with the Marx Brothers films. I thought it was one of the great ones, and I thought, opera and races together represented, an important moment in their career. I always preferred the Paramounts. But it didn't feel to me embarrassing or like a dramatic decline for the brothers. I do think sometimes when we have done episodes of this podcast where we'll focus in on something specific that makes you compare two of the Marx Brothers films in a new and certain way, the differences become very illuminated. And when we did our episode, offhand, I don't remember the episode number, but we did an episode talking just about all the Groucho Chico encounters in all the films, which made us look side by side at the contract routine from A Night at the Opera and the Tootsie-Frootsie scene from A Day at the Races. And I think a comparison of those two scenes really tells you what the difference is between these two films in a way that is very fair. It's not, we're not blaming, the water carnival on, we're not blaming the inferiority of Races to Opera on the water carnival or the fact that the Dr. Hackenbush song isn't in it or any of that. Tootsie-Frootsie scene is expertly executed comedy. It's very, very well done. It's just not what we want from the Marx Brothers. And in my opinion, one of the most important ways in which it falls short is it's not funny over and over and over again. The first few times I saw the Tootsie-Frootsie scene, I thought it was hilarious. But now I don't anymore. The contract scene I could watch every day and not laugh out loud at it, but continue to find it comedically rewarding and rich in a way that that really nothing in A Day at the Races or any later Marx Brothers film is. And that's the difference. The comedy itself is ultimately a little disappointing to me. Well, folks, we've got one more comment to play and respond to here. We actually have two comments left. We are saving one for this new bonus segment. So our Patreon subscribers will hear there's one comment we got that's a little longer and more complicated than the rest, and different in notable ways. So we're going to make a bonus segment out of it and respond to it in detail as it deserves. In the meantime, here on our proper episode, the final remarks will come from John J. McKinney.
I would love to know when it was decided and how it was decided and who decided to include these artists. The singing of Ivy Anderson is marvelous, and the dancing of the Lindy Hoppers is wonderful. Their work is splendid, and it was great that a general audience got exposed to these artists. But at what cost? Because a lot of the other stuff in this sequence is cringeworthy, and probably just as cringeworthy in the 1930s to anyone who knew better. So, gentlemen, do you know whose idea it was to include the black performers? Thalberg? Or maybe those incorrigible progressives Harpo and Groucho Marx? Does anybody know for sure? It seems obvious in the movie that Arthur Marx, the human being, wants to show solidarity, which is why Harpo the artist is interacting so closely with the black actors. But while Harpo's ongoing angel motif is apparent in the Gabriel section of the proceedings, I'm pretty sure that in the 1930s, the 1830s, and probably the 2030s, the black community's concept of an angelic figure is not some white guy. So that's my argument. Exquisite performances by black artists embedded in some really cringeworthy stuff that just won't cut it in the 21st century, but could help be on the way. In a few short years, A Day at the Races will come into the public domain. When that happens, it would be wonderful if somebody would decringe this part of the film and actually streamline and tighten up the whole movie. Maybe bring it in at about 85 minutes. 3D optional, but not required. So my question for you, Matthew and Noah, do you guys happen to know of anyone like, a video editor? You know, some guy who has the skill to be able to take a video and edit it? It would be helpful if such a guy actually likes the Marx Brothers and knows something about them, and maybe even bonus points if he knows something about the hometown of the Pope. Can you help me out, guys?
Well, I could help out. I know some people. I don't know why you're asking Matthew. No, I know. I definitely know some video editors.
Who know the Pope?
That's a very, very good question. It's a more thought-provoking question than it might perhaps first seem, I think. And I think it has a happy answer, which is, the question is who or what, or was pushing to include those scenes. Why did they bother? Which, when you think of what a palaver they make of incorporating it, they have to be showcased, but they also have to be isolated so you don't offend bigots in the South or whatever, and it just seems like a hell of a lot of hard work. So why did they bother? I can't imagine anybody at the studio particularly having a vested interest in that. I can't imagine any individual person having enough clout to push for that, with the possible exception of Thalberg, but I'm sure he didn't, because obviously there are loads of other movies made around this time that have similar sequences in them. So I think the answer must just be the public. I think the public must have just recognized these entertainers for what they were, extremely good entertainers, and responded well to them. And that therefore, the studio is meeting a genuine public appetite, albeit one that is hidebound by a load of extrinsic regulations.
I do know that there is a false answer to this question that floats around sometimes in fan circles. Sometimes, in the rush to defend this sequence, people will attribute its genesis to the Marx Brothers and say, "Oh, well, not only is it not racist in any way at all, the Marx Brothers insisted on giving work to these talented black performers, and they wanted it included because they were not racists." Well, calm down. First of all, no serious commenter is calling the Marx Brothers racists when this scene is discussed. That's not in the room. But you can see where that idea comes from. No, they wanted to give work to these friends of theirs. When I was working on There's Nothing Like Liberty, the Marx Brothers and America, there's a sequence in that documentary about this scene, and I explored it as much as I could, and tried to get an answer to that question. Is there any possibility? Is there any truth to that refrain that the Marx Brothers were responsible for including it? I couldn't find an answer, so I asked the person who I thought probably, if anyone knows, it would be Robert Bader. He said no, he had no reason to think that the Marx Brothers had specifically moved to include that in the film. I will certainly sign off on everything John says in his comments, but Ivy Anderson, as a great jazz vocalist, she's terrific in the movie, and liking her performance of All God's Chillin' Got Swing has made me listen to some of her other recordings, including many that she made with Duke Ellington's band. She's great. Her career was much shorter than it might have been, and really a great singer. And on that note, I believe we have reached the end of our listener comments. Before we close this episode, we want to say a word in memory of Joy Harmon, Groucho Marx's occasional television sidekick, You Bet Your Life contestant, and film actor who appeared most notably in the car wash scene in Cool Hand Luke. But there are other credits there too. We had Joy on the podcast recently to talk about her experiences with Groucho. That was episode 88, The Joy of Marx. And we believe that this was Ms. Harmon's final interview. She passed away in April of this year, just a couple of weeks before her 88th birthday. Godspeed, Joy Harmon. It was a pleasure having her on this show. We're very lucky that she was here with us to record her memories of Groucho. And we recommend everyone listen to it and remember her. We're going to close, as we so often do, with a song. We're going to meet the request that Eddie Deason ventured in his comments and play an outtake of sorts from A Day at the Races. This is Alan Jones's recording of I've got a message from the Man in the Moon.
Do we have any idea where that song would have fit in the film?
Oh, good question.
No, I don't know.
I've got a message from the Man in the Moon for you, just you. He said to tell you there's a bench in the park for two, just two. I know you should be sleeping, and I'm keeping you awake, but I'm just delivering a message he told me to take. I've got the message saying love will be round to call, and then if we don't meet him, he may never be round to call again. The evening found me lonely, and I thought you might be lonely too. So I brought a message from the Man in the Moon for you.
The Marx Brothers Council podcast is produced by Bob Cassell. Matthew Conium's books, including the annotated Marx Brothers, the annotated Abbott and Costello, and That's Me, Groucho, are published by McFarland. Noah Diamond's book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of Alsatias, is published by Beer Manor Media. To leave a comment and for more info about this and all episodes, visit us at marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com. For the latest Marx Brothers and podcast news, look for us on Blue Sky and Twitter. And join the fun with the largest and most vibrant Marx community online, a club that will have someone like you as a member, the Marx Brothers Council Facebook group. That's it for now. Swordfish!
No, I got tired of that. I changed it.